right, welcome to Cwic Media's Come Follow Me series on the Doctrine and Covenants. We are covering sections 77 through 80. We're going to stick primarily with 77 on this. And do me a favor, if you haven't already, make sure that you hit the subscribe button and hit that little bell if you're on YouTube, and that way you get alerted on all of our new videos. And if you're listening on Spotify, on iTunes, or Apple Podcast, please make sure you give us a like there as well. All right, in this episode, we're going to do something just a little bit different. I'm going to do a little bit of picture-in-picture as we go through the scriptures online here. So if you are on video, you will see some of this and be able to read along with me as I go through this. Section 77 is a set of questions and answers for Joseph Smith. We're not sure exactly what all of the background is on this, not that I've seen. But it's not about looking at what all of the real answers are to the book of Revelation and what does this whole book mean. Not at all. This is really, I think, if you see what Joseph Smith is doing here, he's teaching us how to understand the book better. He actually says later in his life, toward the end of his life, that the book of Revelation is really one of the most simple books there are, one of the most plain books there are. But of course, he's had the heavens open to him, as John the Revelator has. He's seen a number of these things, I would imagine. Remember, we're just coming out of a vision here in section 76, so this carries right over to the book of Revelation. These types of visions, even section 76, is what we call apocalyptic literature. And what that means is not necessarily what you think it means. So when we're looking at the book of Revelation here, apocalyptic to us means end of days, end of times. The definition of that has kind of changed in pop culture, even in Christian culture and vernacular quite a bit. That's not really what apocalyptic means, right? Apocalyptic is actually, apocalypse is actually the name of the book of Revelation. So apocalypse means revelation. So a revelatory experience. Typically we're talking about the heavens opening and a vision being given. That is apocalyptic experience, an apocalyptic experience. And when it's written down, it is apocalyptic literature. So Daniel, for example, has apocalyptic literature, and Isaiah are good examples of this. Nephi, of course, and Lehi. Joseph Smith, Sidney Rigdon. This is all apocalyptic experiences and apocalyptic literature. And it's written in a very different manner because it's written in symbols. It's written in ideas, concepts, precepts. We should not take these things literally. For the most part, there are exceptions to that. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to run through section 77, these questions and these answers, and just add a little bit of flavor here to what Joseph Smith does here in answering these questions given to him about the book of Revelation. So in the summary here, we see that this is in connection with the translation of the scriptures. Yet again, so much has come from this, from the translation of the Bible. He says, in connection with the translation of the scriptures, I received the following explanation of the revelation of St. John. This book of Revelation, by the way, you can go back, and I did not complete all of this in the New Testament, but I have one or two episodes there that you might want to take a look at in regards to certainly the first part of the book of Revelation, which covers a large portion of what Joseph Smith is going through here. I'll put that link here in the description on YouTube and in the cards here on YouTube. The first question that's given to him is, what is the sea of glass spoken of by John, chapter 4 and 6th verse of the Revelation? He says the answer is, it is the earth in its sanctified, immortal, and eternal state. So a few things I would bring up about this. I think it's interesting whenever you hear about how the Lord is going to change things. Sometimes it's through destruction. But he talks about the valleys will be raised and the mountains will be leveled. What is that idea there? What is that doing? It's creating a flat surface. And so when I read that, that's one thing I think about, because that reference is made often, that the Lord is going to basically flatten the surface. Maybe that's just a symbolic way of saying he's trying to purify the earth. But a sea of glass would represent also the Urim and Thummim, a great Urim and Thummim, as Joseph Smith says it is. And if you go and you see the interview that I did with Don Bradley on the lost 116 pages of the Book of Mormon, he gives a great description in his book about the Urim and Thummim, the actual stones, which are very clear. They're triangular, in fact. Each of them are triangular. But they're clear, and they're clear as glass. They're like diamonds. And Joseph Smith describes the earth in its celestial glory will be like a great Urim and Thummim. Now, the next question is, what are we to understand by the four beasts spoken of in the same verse? Here's his answer. They are figurative expressions, right? Figurative. These things are all figurative. You need to think about, and by the way, again, and I emphasize this point all the time, but think about the creation story. Think about the Garden of Eden story, right? These are visions. They're visions. You need to read them as visions and not as history. Lehi's vision, Lehi's dream. You don't look at that as if everything is exactly real, tangible. It's symbolic with real people in it. And that's how we should look at these things. They're very symbolic, this kind of apocalyptic literature. So he says there are four figurative expressions used by the Revelator John in describing heaven, the paradise of God, the happiness of man and of beasts, and of creeping things, and of the fowls of the air, that which is spiritual being in the likeness of that which is temporal. Okay, so I would say here, think about things that they're in their likeness, but it's not exactly what it is. So when you see things that are spiritual, oftentimes what you're looking at is what the vision is. Those are the spiritual things. The beasts are the spiritual things, because spiritual oftentimes means symbolic. That's how the ancients used to look at it. Things that were symbolic were spiritual. So he says, that which is spiritual being in the likeness of that which is temporal, and that which is temporal in the likeness of that which is spiritual. The spirit of man in the likeness of his person, as also the spirit of the beast and every other creature which God has created. So again, he's not going in and telling us exactly what each of the beasts mean, does he? He doesn't do that. He's giving us an idea of how to imagine these things, of what he saw. He's explaining not specifically what it is, but maybe how we can learn more about these visions. Here again, I use temple imagery because to me the temple is a vision. And the creation story and the Garden of Eden story are a vision that were given to several prophets. So if I look at that and I see the four beasts, well, I'm going to see a number of things here that would go along with that. Where else do I find four in places that would be temple imagery or in an apocalyptic vision? Well, I see that there are four rivers coming out from the tree of life in the Garden of Eden. Well, that's interesting. What about, oftentimes we think about the seraphim. There were four seraphim, which are actually fiery serpents, and we can think of them very similar to the cherubim that Isaiah saw around the throne of God in the temple, in the Holy of Holies. So there's four beasts that you see at just outside of right around the throne. If the throne is at the tree of life, then in the Garden of Eden we see four rivers that are coming out. Out to what? Out to the world. Four is representative of a temporal existence. Four is the earth. A square is the earth. The circle is heaven. Now, question 3 follows up on the four beasts. It says, are the four beasts limited to individual beasts, or do they represent classes or orders? This is a great question. I think this is what they want you to start thinking. Do they represent classes or orders? Well, we find classes and orders. What is he saying? Those are, as we talk about, think about hierarchies. These are hierarchies. There's order in what this vision is in the book of Revelation. He says they are limited to 4 individual beasts, which were shown to John. So he sees 4 beasts to represent the glory of the classes of beings in their destined order or sphere of creation in the enjoyment of their eternal felicity. So that is not very specific. But I think what we get out of this again is hierarchy and order. That is what these visions are about. And so we need to keep that in mind when we read apocalyptic literature. Verse 4, what are we to understand by the eyes and wings which the beasts had? He says, they are a representation of light and knowledge. That is, they are full of knowledge, and their wings are a representation of power to move and to act. Okay, now, something that I would say is interesting here. You've got 4 beasts, and you've got 6 wings on each of the beasts in Isaiah's in Isaiah's vision. So 4 seraphim with 6 wings each. That is 24 wings. Keep that in mind. So as we read different places about eyes and wings, we learn more about what might be going on here. And I would say this, that it says their eyes are a representation of light and knowledge. Okay, so there's light and knowledge somewhere around the throne, coming up to the throne of God. That is what we are trying to grasp. That's what we're trying to get. We want light and knowledge. Think about that. All right, and then we go to verse 5. What are we to understand by the 4 and 20 elders spoken of by John? His answer, we are to understand that these elders whom John saw were elders who had been faithful in the work of the ministry and were dead, who belonged to 7 churches and were then in the paradise of God. Now, a couple of things here in learning about numbers that John uses. A great reference for all of this, I would highly recommend Ian Paul's book on the Book of Revelation. He goes over numbers quite a bit, my good friend from the Church of England. I would recommend that book. I'll put that link also in the description. But one thing he points out is you're going to see a lot of numbers in the numerology here that are numbers that are by themselves. In other words, they're just 1 times themselves, like a number 7, which is perfect, or a 3, right? And then you have numbers that, you get a lot of numbers that are squared, like an altar is square in the temple. And then you get a lot of numbers in the book of Revelation, which are cubed. So numbers that are squared, like 4, right? 2 times 2. You can look at as something that is a representation of the altar, perhaps, in the temple. You can also look at, or even the throne, or around the throne, the 4 sides of the throne. You can also look at a number that is cubed like 1,000. You'll see that number several times, I believe, in the book of Revelation. Well, that's 10 times 10 times 10, right? It's a cubed number. Well, where do we get a cube? Well, that's the Holy of Holies. Now, back to our number 24 here. 24 is an interesting number. We talked about 4 times 6, but we also can say 2 times 12. Now, with our number 24, let's take a look at this. I want to go over to Revelation 4 and take a look at the 24 elders here. Here it says in verse 4 of chapter 4 of the book of Revelation, and round about the throne, there it is, right, were 24 seats. And upon the seats I saw 24 elders sitting. So 24, again, I'm going to go back to the 4 seraphim and the 6 wings on each of them. Where else do we find 24? What would this mean? Why are there 24 seats of elders? Well, I've got a few things I think I wrote down here. Okay, so later on in the book of Revelation, in chapter 21, the patriarchs and apostles are later linked in the description of the New Jerusalem, where the names of the apostles are placed on the foundation stones and the names of the patriarchs are inscribed over the gates. And you basically get 24 of these. King Noah's group, right? Let me go over here to Mosiah 20. Remember this? This is very interesting. If you come over to Mosiah 20, this is verse 5, and this is where King Noah and the priests had fled. Remember, they fled from the Lamanites and wimping out here and letting their wives and children possibly get slaughtered. But here's what it says in verse 5. And when there were but a few of them, these are the girls that are out dancing, the Lamanite daughters that are out dancing. A few of them gathered together to dance. They came forth out of their secret places. That's the priests of Noah and King Noah, and carried them into the wilderness. Look at this. Yea, 24 of the daughters of the Lamanites they carried into the wilderness. 24. Why would there be 24? Well, perhaps that's how many they used in their dance. That's very possible. That would be one number. Here's another number. The Sanhedrin. The Sanhedrin in the smaller cities throughout Judea would have, throughout Israel, would have 23 members. You had to have an odd number for voting. It's very possible that as Abinadi was facing King Noah and his priests, that there were 23 of them. And Alma, of course, leaves and then was probably replaced by somebody for them to carry on with their trials and administration and everything else. And then the priests and King Noah leave. And there would be 23 of the priests then, if that were the case, and one king. 24. Well, of course, they went and they grabbed 24 daughters of the Lamanites. Very interesting. Not something that Joseph Smith was probably very aware of. Okay, coming back here to our Revelation 4 then, a few other things that I want to go over with the 24 seats. The Kirtland Temple was built on one side. It had 12 Aaronic pulpits and 12 Melchizedek pulpits on the other side. It's kind of like with the Salt Lake Temple. You have the 3 higher spires, which represent the presidency of the Melchizedek priesthood, and the 3 lower spires that represent the presidency of the Aaronic priesthood, which is the presiding bishopric, and bring that down to every stake and every ward. Another one is that Joseph Smith had also planned 24 buildings with names similar to the names of the 24 courses of priests in Jerusalem. So he was going to build in Zion 24 of these temples that represented another number, 24 courses of the priests. Remember that when Zechariah is at the temple, the father of John the Baptist, he is there because his course, his 24th, his course was assigned to the temple. Usually it was twice a year, maybe 1 week, and then 1 week later on in 6 months later. I believe it's 1 week each. Yes, that's right. And one priest gets to do that one time in their life. And that's when Zechariah is there, because his course, 24 of them, was assigned to the temple in that week, and he was there to burn the incense. And that's when he gets the visit from Gabriel. So 24 courses of priests, like the 24 elders around the throne. Also remember where Zechariah is. He's close to the throne. He would be burning the incense at the altar of incense right in front of the veil of the Holy of Holies. Another one to look at would be the 24 Jaredite plates. And it might just be that that's what it took to write, or it might be, knowing how important numbers were to the ancients, that they put out 24 plates and said, this is how we're going to fill this. We're going to fill this in 24 because 24 is complete to us. 24 means something to us. So another thing to think about. Okay. Back over to our Doctrine and Covenants and some of these questions. I'm only going to do a few more here. Verse 6, what are we to understand by the book which John saw, which was sealed on the back with 7 seals? We are to understand that it contains the revealed will, mysteries, and the works of God, the hidden things of his economy concerning this earth during the 7,000 years of its continuance, or its temporal existence. What does that mean? Again, I'm not going to go into a literal reading of these things. I don't know that what he's saying is even literal. Even 1,000 years may not be literal. And if it is, a temporal existence, what does that mean? Is that from the time of Adam to us and nothing before? Lot to look into there. But what I wanted to talk about here was the book. The book is here in these visions often, in fact, almost always. We don't always hear about it, perhaps, but it's typically there. We get this in the book of Revelation. We get this in a lot of other non-canonical visions where there is a book that is eaten or it's opened up. So very common in these visions. So is this something actually that would have been a metal book, kind of like the Book of Mormon was, that was sealed? We know that anciently there are metal books. We usually see this from scholars. They don't usually incorporate the metal types of plates. And what they talk about is a scroll, and that's usually how it's depicted, and that's usually how your seminary teacher or your institute teacher are going to tell you that this would have been a scroll with 7 wax seals on it to be opened up at certain times. And that's very possible because it's kind of like a will and a testament is the way that would read. But who knows? I mean, could this possibly have been metal plates? We know they existed, and we know that they were sealed in different ways. Down to verse 8. What are we to understand by the 4 angels spoken of in the 7th chapter and 1st verse of Revelation? He says, we are to understand they are 4 angels sent forth from God, to whom is given power over the 4 parts of the earth. So sent out from God, so there's another 4, right? 2 times 2, another square. To save life and to destroy, these are they who have the everlasting gospel, to commit to every nation, kindred, tongue, and people, having power to shut up the heavens, to seal up unto life, or to cast down to the region of darkness. So again, when we see these words like every nation, kindred, tongue, and people, it's about the earth. It's to spread out throughout the earth. Well, that's what the rivers do. And the rivers are, in a sense, the gospel of Jesus Christ. You can look at it that way. It's the love of God that is being sent out through the 4 rivers throughout the world. Here we have the 4 angels with the gospel. And then we touch on to our good friend Elias here again in verse 9. Question is, what are we to understand by the angel descending from the east in Revelation 7th chapter and 2nd verse? He says, we are to understand that the angel ascending from the east is he to whom is given the seal of the living God over the 12 tribes of Israel. So the seal would be the power to open up. The keys, perhaps, of the living God over the 12 tribes of Israel. Wherefore he crieth unto the 4 angels, having the everlasting gospel, saying, hurt not the earth, neither the sea nor the trees, till we have sealed the servants of our God in their foreheads. And if you will receive it, this is Elias, which was to come to gather together the tribes of Israel and restore all things. Who is Elias? We don't know who he is. He is an ancient prophet that appeared to Joseph Smith at Kirtland. We'll get to that in section 110. He is not Moses, who is also to gather the 12 tribes. He is not Elijah, which is which is the name Elias in Hebrew. He is one who is to restore all things, and more than likely, it seems that he is someone who is alive near the time of Abraham. But we get back to this whole, it's a conundrum. It really is. We do not know who Elias is. Some will say it's Noah. That's possible. But there's some evidence against that too. All right, then I'm going to go down to verse 11. What are we to understand by sealing the 144,000 out of all the tribes of Israel? 12,000 out of every tribe. He says, we are to understand that those who are sealed are high priests, ordained unto the holy order of God, that's the Melchizedek priesthood, to administer the everlasting gospel. For they who are ordained out of every nation, kindred, tongue, and people, by the angels to whom is given power over the nations of the earth to bring as many as will come to the church of the firstborn. Here's something really interesting. Right? That is not Israelites. Those are not Israelites. Those are not Levites. Those high priests are ordained from every nation, kindred, tongue, and people. This isn't a time of the fullness of the gospel like we have here in the last days, where the Melchizedek priesthood is available to everyone. But here we have numerology again, right? Numerology, what do we have here? We've got a number 144,000. Well, let's think about this for a second. So we have our number 12 again. What if we square that number 12? We're talking about going out to the whole earth and 12 tribes of Israel. So let's square that like an altar, and we get 12 times 12, which is 144. And then we're going to combine that square with the cube being brought into the Holy of Holies and perfection with the gathering of Israel and creating a Zion people. And that's where the priests would go, right? They would go, the high priest would go once a year, and the Day of Atonement goes to the Holy of Holies, the cube, which is, by the way, layered with gold. And so if we take the square of 12 times 12, 144, times the cube of 10 times 10 times 10 of the Holy of Holies, we get 1,000. So 12 times 12 is 144. 144 times 1,000 is our 144,000. It's a little chewing gum for your brain there. So that's about as much time as I have in this episode. But I think the important thing to gather here from 77, which is what I wanted to focus on, is that we can learn how to read these things and understand them symbolically as we read other scripture, as we bring things together. Where else do we see this? Where else do I see this number? How might I relate this to the temple? And I think that Joseph Smith here, what he's doing is not trying to give us a description of everything at all, because this falls way short. He's helping us learn how to learn about these visions in this apocalyptic literature. I would recommend that you read a few of the visions and try to understand this a little bit better. And you don't need to go through and read all the book of Revelation, but what if you just went back and read Isaiah 6? Read 1 Nephi 13. Read 1 Nephi 1. Read Daniel 11. And just pick up on some of these things. Keep the temple in mind. Keep order and hierarchy, structure, symbolism in mind as you go through that. I'll talk to you next time.